Welcome to The Making of Madrid, a podcast about everything to do with life in Madrid, covering history, culture, food, and much more. The podcast is presented, as always, by me, Felicity Hughes, Madrid resident, freelance journalist, and tour guide. And this episode is about a subject very close to my heart. It's about wine. But I'm not the expert here. My expert is Luke Darracott. So let's go and meet him. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the podcast, Luke. I'll just do you a quick introduction. Luke is the co-owner of Madrid and Darracott, a wine shop in central Madrid that he runs with his partner, Roque Madrid, which is
It's a very useful name.
It's a really cool name.
A lot of people think it's a fake name, real name.
They do a podcast themselves called The Spanish Wine Experience that I urge you to look out for because it's excellent. He's a font of knowledge about Spanish wine and about wine produced in Madrid, which is where I first met Luke because he helped me out when I was writing about these topics. And when we're talking about Madrid, I don't mean the city of Madrid, but the wider Madrid Comunidad area, which is huge and is lots and lots of countryside, some of it quite remote, right?
Yeah, people I think don't realize how big Madrid actually is. You go to the mountains, it can take you hours to get anywhere.
Yeah. Okay, so first things first is what brought you to Madrid?
This is where you do the usual joke, a plane. But it was, so I did the quick elevator pitch. I did Spanish and Russian at university. So when I graduated, I came to Madrid for a year to practice my Spanish, went to Moscow for a year. And the original plan was go back to London, get what a lot of people would call a proper job. It was going to be Foreign Office, Diplomat Corps, MI5, MI6, all this cool sounding stuff with suits and nice wages. But as a lot of us probably do when we first touch down in Madrid and you live here for a bit, you kind of fall in love with Madrid. And all I knew is I wanted to come back to Madrid, didn't know what to do, did come back, and then 15 years later, still here. That's like the small version of it.
And how did you meet Rocky?
Yes, that was the very first year I moved here, I had made contact with him because I was getting into like making movies at university. So I did like a film unit or whatever. We didn't end up meeting that very first year. That was back in the days where Facebook was a lot more innocent. You just added everyone you met who was nice. And then when I came back after Moscow, I kind of like, hi, me again. Sorry, we never met up. And we did meet up because he had just done a TV show in Murcia, where he's from, about sort of looking at his part of Murcia through the eyes of foreigners. Each episode is like a different giddy like me talking about something to do with Murcia. And I had just written a book about the Spanish region. So there's kind of like tourism-y, foreign looking at Spain element. So he thought, oh, be intrigued to meet this guy. So we met in the San Miguel market. The same evening, my bag got stolen. He came with me to the police station, pretended to be me on the phone to help me out because my Spanish was good, but not like deal with the police good. And so we always joke our friendship was forged in thievery and wine. And we've been friends ever since.
And what's your wine connection then?
We're both qualified. Well, no, I'm a qualified alcoholic. He just likes drinking. We just fell in love with wine. So I was like, one of the nice things he sometimes says is he's learned to love Spanish wine through me because it's a bit like, you know, when you live in a city and you're from that place and you've probably been to see some other things, then you have the person from without who starts to live there and they sort of go, oh my God, this is amazing. Your city's amazing. And then you fall in love with your town maybe more. I fell in love with wine in the first year I lived here. And then basically every time we would meet, I would maybe try and bring a different bottle of wine I discovered. And I was starting to get into these different regions. And then, you know, Roque loves good wine as well. So I think it was just a kind of a combined me going, oh, should we try this? Should we drink this? Because I was also getting into sort of wine and food tourism in Madrid. I think he was just like, this is interesting. I didn't realize we had all this stuff in our own country. And then we kind of sort of snowballed from there.
So it's more organic than going and learning your WSE.
Yeah, so I would say I'm the wine geek side of things because I came from a country with no wine culture. And so suddenly I'm in this cultural wine landscape with all these amazing wine regions and different grapes. And, oh, this dish pairs perfectly with the wine of the area, blah, 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 blah. Then you have the other side, which is someone who's from that culture but doesn't necessarily know about what's outside their regions, maybe. And so it was kind of an organic thing. And we obviously just both love drinking wine anyway. So it kind of worked quite well. I didn't have to convince him to have a drink.
I just feel like wine is some people find it like a hidden world that they find a little bit intimidating. Do you think you do something to make it more accessible?
I mean, we do strip away. Are you allowed to swear on your podcast? I'll just say the BS. We strip away the BS because I always thought wine was really scary and pretentious when I was back in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was half my family are from like Somerset and Bristol, or you may love that kind of area. So I was brought up drinking cider and ale at university and all these kind of things. But I always thought wine was tasty, but scary and French and chateau or something or other, and wasn't very accessible. And it still is a bit like that. Also, for a lot of countries, it is just the expensive alcoholic option of normal drinks compared to beer or cider. And then I moved to Spain, where it's cheap, and the world, I'm not saying there aren't pretentious people, good Lord, there are, but in general, it's a bit more humble as a product and a drink compared to, let's say, France, Italy, cough, cough, cough. It's more like the Portuguese vibe. It's a bit more like product of the land, which I quite liked. And it's very much tied to the local areas, which you same in Italy and France. So I think we wanted to transmit, that kind of like, this is a safe space kind of drink. At the same time, we wanted to kind of transmit wine is just a drink. It doesn't have to be scary and complicated, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing how many people have relatives who make wine. So my husband's family make wine every year in a very traditional way. They're out in Darracott, and so they have family fields of olives and wine. Sorry, olives and grapes, obviously.
That's
vines.
Right. We'll let it go. We'll let that
slide. And they let go most of the land. They kept on little parcels so they can make their own olive oil and their own wine. Nice. They're not allowed to sell it because it's illegal. But they give it away as presents and stuff. It's pretty rough, but I've done like the vendemmia and
nice. I haven't even done that.
And they have an old press and they make it in the amphoras.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sort of. I always as an Englishman living in Spain, it's always fun to try and lambast French wine. But there's obviously lots of people who have their own, the back garden and the vineyards and stuff. But I think it's kind of conceptually a lot more of a crop and a sustained product here than it is like a big business like it is. Because no one in the US is doing that because, it's really expensive. And in France, it has morphed into this kind of fancy, elegant haute cuisine product at times. Whereas Spain, apart from a few wineries and a few wines, I like the fact that it still has that kind of, Paco's got some vines and we buy wine from him for Christmas and it's all just off the books. It's quite nice.
And so going back to Madrid, it's got a DO, which is, there's a technical term, which is Denominación de
Origen, yeah.
And what sort of varieties work here? What grapes?
I always like to insult gently our local DO because the name is ridiculous. It's Denominación de Origen Vinos de Madrid, as if there's some other Madrid that could be named after. I think it should be DO Madrid, but anyway. And there's these 4 little subzones, and they all have similar but different vibes. So, for example, the traditional areas, I say it in inverted commas, but the one which we traditionally would associate with Madrid wines and the ones you can often find traditionally and maybe even Carrefour are from the southeast, is in the area called Arganda, named after the beautiful town of Arganda del Rey. And that's kind of our workhorse traditional area where it's mostly kind of Tempranillo, más cosas, they always say, with other bits and bobs.
That's the standard Spanish grape, right?
That's our superstar classic. It's the most planted grape in Spain now. And that is the one that dominates there. And there's also bits of Cab Sav and other bits and bobs you can blend in. And then for whites, they've got a grape there called Malvar, which is a cool name. Sounds like a Disney baddie, Malvar.
Right.
And that tends to make quite affable, juicy, quite unctuous, kind of nice white wines. And that's kind of that bit. And then you have sort of a little town called Navalcarnero, which is quite a small subzone. And that's going to be where you're going to start finding the grape Grenache for the rest of the world, but still with that Malvar grape. If you go due north of Madrid towards the mountains, you'll see our newest subzone. There's like 3 wineries. It's very new. And that's called El Molar. And that's also like Garnacha, but they're kind of the cool kid on the block, the one which is getting all the accolades and has like kind of put Madrid on the map is if you go due west to the mountains, there's a little town called San Martín de Valdeiglesias. Not the prettiest place. It's got a castle, fair enough. But that's where you'll find these high altitude, like mountainside garnachas again, Grenache, and a grape called Albio, which makes some incredible, like, if you barrel ferment it and age it, incredibly kind of complex wines. And that's that little nook in the west on the mountains is kind of the cool kid on the block, which is changing and being more modern and cool and all this kind of vibe. So it's kind of these 4 bits doing similar but different things.
And those garnachas, they got written about in the
They got wrote about.
You got wrote about. I'm a writer, me.
I do words.
The New York Times.
Yeah, they got like a couple of cool editorials written about them, and then as an extension, they'll be mentioning like these Wine Spectator and Decanter. So I mean, it's one of these ironies. It's like always with Spain. I mean, we're doing, at the time of recording, whenever this is going to be going out, we're doing our Spanish Wine Scholar course. We're a school, and we offer a proper, it's an international, you mentioned WSET, this is another thing focused by the Wine Scholar Guild per country. And when you go through each region of Spain, it's always like the Romans were here, the so-and-sos were here, which is true. And then you have like this modern concept of the Dio. So like there's always been wine in Madrid area. The Dio only was founded, the region, in 1990, and it was still, I mean, you've been here quite a while as well.
Yeah.
I didn't notice Madrid wines when I first moved here. So it's only recently in the modern era it's got that spark, and I think it's things like that. A New York article noticing this wine that kind of makes, that spark of the fuse kind of thing. There's always been wine, but it's like only recently becoming popular, and it's mostly those garnachas.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the vines are really old, right? There's vines stretching that date from the time of the Civil War. That
Yeah,
was
you can get
abandoned.
some really old vines, and that's the thing. The abandoned thing, the Civil War, wonderful time, but that was a time where a lot of vineyards were just left, especially in traditional areas, because also they favoured other crops sometimes. A lot of in the Franco area, a lot of, especially like the Mediterranean area, they were paid, farmers who had wine vineyards were paid to get rid of these rubbishy crops, like random grapes that no one wants. They would start replanting what they thought were cash crops, like Chardonnays and Cabernet Sauvignons, or other crops that were more necessary for that era. Like, we can't eat grapes, we can eat cereals, so plant those instead. It's kind of a weird time, and that obviously happened in Madrid. And so, like you say, there's these little winemakers who still today are like finding, often by word of mouth, like, they're in a bar, and the guy called Paco is talking about his friend Jorge, who has got a friend's postman who's got a vineyard which he wants to get rid of, and then they find in some nook up a mountain some 80-year-old vineyard of like enough amazing Garnacha grapes to make a new wine, for example. So it's quite amazing how they keep finding these things.
You were saying about those grapes being planted like Chardonnay is not necessarily a good grape for Spain, right?
Chardonnay's, don't get me started on Chardonnay. I don't really like it as a grape. I think it's kind of boring. And I don't mean it makes bad wines. There's no such thing as a good or bad grape for making good or bad wine if you're good at making wine. But it doesn't have much personality. So we've done lots of blind tastings, and you'll be like, that's a nice wine. What is that? And it's a Chardonnay. Would never have known, because depending on where you plant a Chardonnay, it will change dramatically from cold areas to warm areas like Spain. But on the flip side, it can kind of work anywhere. So Chardonnays can work in Spain, but then there's this little bit of me which is thinking, who wants that? Why would I bother even? I mean, we have got some and they're great, but they're not demonstrably interesting enough for me. Most grapes, if you can choose the right place, can more or less work most places where there are viticulture, unless it's a complicated grape. So like Pinot Noir is famously tricky to do, needs quite cool areas. Spain famously doesn't have a lot of very cool areas. But if you go up a mountain somewhere, you can get a bit cooler. Maybe you can make them work up there. So we have
Sauvignon
international
Blanc as well.
Sauvignon Blanc, famously Sauvignon Blanc was very good from Rueda. We have Verdejo. It was actually planted there by the Marqués de Riscal, of all people. I think it was in the 70s they planted that. It was very popular because it was also quite a useful way of pushing the Verdejo grape, because nobody knew internationally what Verdejo is. But when you see Sauvignon Blanc on the label as well, people were like, oh, Sauvignon Blanc, I know that. And then it got popular. They didn't need that anymore. So there are some really good Sauvignon Blancs from there, even though Verdejo overtook it. Pretty much any grape, we call them international varieties, which means French grapes. You can kind of find in Spain. There are not many Merlots, not many Cab Sauv, but quite a lot of Syrah, which is amazing in Spain. Big and juicy like an Australian one. Chardonnays here, Sauvignon Blancs here. I've tried a Riesling, Gewürztraminer. But What Spain is trying to push Spanish these days.
Oh, I've just thought of a question, because when you go to a bar, they always ask you Rioja or
Ribera. Yeah.
Can you explain, like, what's the typical reds and whites
So
to be offered in a bar?
this is the good and bad thing of Spain and wine and Madrid. So Madrid is a wine area, but sadly, you're not going to find many Madrid wines still by the glass. There's only like 45 wineries, and then we have this, we call it the monopoly or the vicious circle of Rioja Ribera, which are fine. Rioja, which is a wine region. Ribera, which means Ribera del Duero, is a wine region, and they're both brilliant. Actually, Rioja is actually possibly, when it's good, the greatest in the country and the most varied. But as you always say, that's not the same as what you find in every bar. Most bars will have 2 reds and maybe more, but they will always have Rioja and Ribera. They'll almost always be red, made from a grape called Tempranillo. The Rioja might have what's called a crianza status, which means it's had a year in a barrel, a year in a bottle, so a little bit of aging, or maybe not. And the Ribera del Duero would also be Tempranillo, maybe aging, maybe not. It just tends to be a bit juicier and heavier. Rioja a bit more medium-bodied. But Rioja is always the big one, always the big dog, the famous one, because it historically is. And it's a bit like Bordeaux in France. It just is that. There's always going to be a famous region. So if I'm a bar in Madrid, why would I not put Ribera del Duero and Rioja? Because that's what people want, right? And then you think, well, I want to order something else, but I can't because it's not there. Because it's kind of a vicious circle. They don't change it because they think no one would order it, but then you can't order something else because it's not on the menu. So it kind of goes round and round for reds.
What do you usually choose yourself?
In a bar, if I don't know what I'm drinking, I don't always want to be that, I won't swear, guy who goes, can I have a look at the bottle, please, for a €3 glass of wine?
Yes.
If I don't know what I'm getting, I'll often opt for Ribera because there's about 550 wineries in Rioja and thousands of producers, great producers. And in Ribera del Duero, there's not even like 300 producers. I think there's like 200 and something. So statistically, in my head, I'm more likely to get a nicer, I don't want to say better, but a nicer for me Ribera than a Rioja, because there's on average maybe more Rioja compared to Ribera. But then if I can see the bottles there, it might be the other way around. You never know. And with whites, it's the same kind of story with Rueda, the region, with the grape Verdejo, of which when they're good, they're great. There's often lots of cheapy Verdejo wines. And the new kid on the block from a few years ago, which is now the second in command, which is the grape Albarino, which actually comes from a region called Rías Baixas, but most people, not very common for Spain, actually just order it by the grape. And they give you 2 profiles, and I will always go for Albarino, crisp, fresh, Galician one. But that's the sad thing is most bars in Madrid, anyway, I can only speak for Madrid because other regions will drink their local grapes. They kind of focus on those 2 for each as a starter because that's what the market wants. It is changing, however, but those are the 2 you'll find in every bar of each colour all across the Comunidad de Madrid, basically.
Yeah. Why, if you're just getting a glass of wine, even though it's cheap, because it's usually about €3,
3 to 4 euros,
yeah,
maybe?
it's still decent quality compared to what you get in the UK.
Oh, yes.
Much cheaper. Why is that?
It's a couple of reasons. One reason is that we do tax wine basically as food here. Same with beer as well. So we always say there's no such thing as the best or worst wine country. So probably the worst wines I've ever had have been French and Italian, but also some of the best wines I've ever had have been French and Italian, but I pay a lot more for them. Some of the best wine I've ever had have been from California, but it's like you need to get a mortgage out to enjoy it regularly. It's crazy. So first of all, price to quality, Spain and actually I would say Portugal are probably the best 2 in the world for price to quality, just because there's no real tax on alcohol in that sense. That's why a gin tonic is not necessarily cheap, but a wine is for the quality you get. And second of all, I think our climate on average can make crapper wine better tasting. So if you get a really cheap Bordeaux or a cheap generic Northern Italian Valpolicella or something, it'll be thin, acidic, limp, just rubbish. It's just like a thin red water. At the very least, Spain is hot as hell. So even the crappest, cheapest, most mass-produced wine, it's still got a bit more juice and a bit more body than the cheapest, crappest of the other lot, because it just is hotter. Now, it's still going to be not particularly nice, but it won't be aggressive. It'll just be like, just tastes of red. But at least it'll have a bit more oomph than the other countries. So I think even, and then I'm talking about the base, the worst, the €1.50 bottles in the supermarkets. So even a crappy bar red, which is probably a bit more expensive than that, will still be drinkable. It might not be very interesting or complex, but quite young, but at least it'll be like, you wouldn't go, oh God, what's that?
But then you can pay a little bit more and get something really great.
Yeah.
And that's why people come here, because the shop that we're sat in the basement right now, which is fantastic old space. It's
the
old
exposed
brick
brick
cellar.
Yeah.
But these kind of cellars are really common.
It's a very classic Madrid thing. These are the old bodegas and storerooms, not for wine, obviously, in Madrid, but it was for they were for coal and almacenes, storerooms and stuff. So all over the city in the old town, basically under any shop you see, whether they decided to expose it, whether they've decided to spend months with a tired Ukrainian dude helping us out expose it, there'll be these exposed brick storerooms. So you'll see that one. You won't, because this is an audio medium, but there are these chutes that go down the side. That was where you would toss all the stuff in and just fall down into the coal room, for example.
I'll put some pictures
Put some photos on,
on the blog. You moved in here fairly recently?
Yeah, so we came here, I think not last year, because now we're in 2025. It was the end of 2023 we moved into this one. So we've been about a year and a bit overall. We've moved a whole street over, but we've been here for now a year and a bit.
And the idea is you can offer more tastings, right?
So yeah, the main passion always, it sounds so pious, was education of wine. But we wanted to basically show the world in whatever way we could. Spain's wines are better, they're cheaper, and there's lots more to drink than Rioja and Ribera, as much as we love Rioja and Ribera. So we always did the tastings. So it's the same here. We do tastings all the time, events and things. Yeah, we are a shop. The difference with this particular location is you can also just grab a glass of wine like a bar, but not a bar, upstairs, and light tapas. But the passion and the focus is always teaching and tastings. And the idea, we want everyone to leave Spain and leave our shop basically having learned something, maybe a new grape or something, and basically going home to their countries going, I'm going to stop buying crappy, cheap Bordeaux. I'll buy some nice Spanish wines instead because it's better, is our hope.
And you have a good selection of Madrid wines.
We've got quite a lot of Madrid wines. It's always in flux. I mean, we always joke the worst time to visit our shop is January and early February because we're coming out of the Christmas thing. But when we're at peak times, we have quite a lot of Madrid wine because we feel we should and want to promote our local area. And yeah, I mean, whites and reds, sometimes rosés, all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
And I know you've done the occasional trip out to Madrid wineries. It's not kind of a standard thing, but you can arrange it for people.
Yeah.
What are good ones to visit?
So there's Madrid. I love Madrid. I'm not going to name any wineries. I don't want to offend anyone, but there are wineries that are beautiful, and they tend to be in I'll just say in the southwest area, in the Alganda subzone, which is the oldest part of our viticultural area. And you have traditional old winery. They're not generally pretty. It's not like going to Rioja and it's like a 200-year-old thing. They tend to be quite workaday, which I quite like. Kind of, you feel like a real agricultural place, but they'll often have like here, but way more dramatic underground cellars, and sometimes they've decorated them with the amazing wine vats and stuff. So visually, it's incredible. But maybe because they're very old school, some of the wines are it's okay. So from a tourism point of view, I have to sort of find I need to take them to a place which is got good wines. Because if you're having a group of tourists or even locals, you've done with locals as well, going out, you want them to drink wine and go, "Oh, that's good wine." But also you have to think people want to go, take photos, how cute. And so there are places like in the mountains in the west, which is a slightly newer area, incredible wines, but some of them are just like a shed on a mountain.
Yeah.
So it's you're going to go there and go, okay. You kind of need to do the both. So we have a few hotspots. So one of my favorite ones is in a really cute it's actually a Pueblo Bonito, it's an official pretty town of Spain called Nuevo Baztán.
Ah, yes, model town.
And it's got one winery, it's called Cuarto Lote, and that's got a bit of a nice combo. It's quite attractive. The village, you've been there, dinky, gorgeous, and the wines are banging, really, really good. And then there's also out in the west, I mentioned a shed up a hill, but quite an attractive little small bodega up a mountain out in the western hills called Las Moradas. That's a great winery, great wines. Of course, this is me always overthinking things. Most people are happy to go anywhere, and as long as the wine's nice. In the town of Colmenar de Oreja, there's some really cool wineries with underground things. So you can't really go wrong, but we always say whatever we do, we start off with who has nice wines, because that's the key. And most of them, like I say, we were saying most of the wines are good anyway, but it's just like you want people to, if we're going to organize all this, you want them to have a wow factor, like that's incredible wine, something new, something different. And then we usually do that in the morning. Then we go and get a lunch next door and drink way too much and eat way too much and put them on a bus home. There's also another one called Valle Iglesias, named after the town of San Martin de Valle de Iglesia. And the winery is up a hill again, but they've also got Fernando, who's the owner, and his brother, they opened in the town of Valle de Iglesias a restaurant linked to their winery. So amazing, like local food, and the wines on their list are the wines from the winery up the hill. So there's also ways of doing it where you don't have to get in a Jeep or hire a car and,
Is that the ones out by the Sierra de Gredos?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Because I know that that's like an area that's amazing for star spotting, and that I think one of the wineries out there.
I think Moradas does the thing. You can go out and they give you wine and you sort of sit out and look at the stars with telescope.
There's a guy who has a telescope who comes and
I've not been there because the problem is I'm always like, how do I get back home?
Yeah, I don't drive. So and even if you drive, you're drinking.
Yes, which we do not condone in Madrid and Darracott.
So people come into the shop and you can is it like a bar?
So it's officially we're called a tasting bar, and it's very important that people realize I'm not a bar, because legally at 10 o'clock, like Carrefour, like a supermarket, I shut because I can't sell alcohol after 10. And it's quite funny. A lot of the locals sort of said, "Oh, what a shame, because you could make more money instead." I'm like, no. I want to go home and sleep. I do not mind that. But because we have what's called a tasting bar license, if I sell it, you can have a glass. Not of like gin tonics and shots, of wine. I'm a wine shop. I sell wine. I'm allowed to sell you a glass of wine. We also sell cheese, ham, pâtés. Therefore, if you're sat down, you can have a cheese board. So if I sell it, you can have it. But at 10 o'clock, we shut. So it's kind of like a bar light, we say.
Yeah.
It's good for like aperitif style things.
And to book all this, you go on your website. We should mention the website.
I mean, if you want to drink, come in whenever you want. Most of what we do, we have like a newsletter, which is the easiest way. Once a month, you get a list of all the events and the tastings, and if we're organizing a winery visit. And then we have quite an active Instagram account. Those can see where most people sort of get the info from.
And the website's
MadridDarracott.com.
Okay.
Very useful to have these two names.
And the Instagram is?
Madrid Darracott.
Okay.
Basically, Darracott, that's my name, is a kind of a unique surname anyway. And so I'm the only Luke Darracott in the world, which is quite handy. Or not, if you want to hide. But anyway, quite useful. And therefore, in Madrid, you just put the word Darracott in. There's nothing else Darracott related. So we always joke, if you can't find us, it's your fault. It's very easy to find.
The other thing that you ran is the pub quiz.
So yeah, we have a couple of events which we've become locally kind of, I don't want to say famous for, but they've become an institution in the sense of we do them every month and people look forward to them, which is really good for our ego, and we wanted to push these things. So my business partner, Roque, he does the wine bingo, the Vingo, which he jokes is great because you don't have to use your brain. You just go and you do like a wine tasting at the same time you play bingo. I didn't realize how popular bingo was in Spain until I moved. I was like, this is what my grandma used to do. But anyway, it's really fun. So you just drink and bingo, and you win a glass of wine and stuff. And I do the pub quiz because I don't think a lot of countries even know what the idea is. I mean, I didn't realize my American friends, some of them just knew it, and some of them were like, what's a pub quiz? I don't get it.
Oh.
But, it's not as common as I thought. But I always wanted to have this idea of like, I've got this downstairs space. So you come with a team and it's not pay to play. You just drink what you want, eat what you want, and I'll do a pub quiz of various rounds. And it's just a nice
But that's
laugh.
in the evening, though, right?
So we do, yeah. So Fridays, we kind of leave Friday evenings open for our events. So there's the two we always have. And then, for example, this Friday, which is obviously, if you're listening to this in the future, no, but this Friday, we're doing one which is called a bodega party. And that's where I choose a winery that I love. We do like a little menu just of their wines. And so you come downstairs and you can just drink. But the idea is we're doing a highlight of one particular winery downstairs. So we're always doing like bits and bobs, but the institutions which are always there are the pub quiz and the wine bingo. One is mine, one is Roque's.
And it's a good place if you've recently moved to Madrid and you don't know many people, you can.
Yeah, the pub quiz is really good. I mean, and we do these theme tastings every Thursday. And there are people, which is really nice, who've been coming to us for years, and they're like best friends. They go on holiday with each other. And I'm always having this little voice, which is like, and they met for the first time 3 years ago, one of our tastings. Because it's like as much as we like tourists, and we need tourists, and they're brilliant. I also felt early on, I wanted to have a couple of moments where the international community could do things here, because I think Madrid is huge city, but it doesn't feel as connected internationally as it does maybe like Barcelona. There's lots of communities of like Brits, Americans, or the Giddies, as we call ourselves, getting together. Whereas Madrid always feels a bit more splayed out. And so it's quite nice to have a little spot. And it's quite nice. You get groups of American girls and Brits. You get the classic people who've been here for a long time, 3 couples, and they're like, Brits and Americans, and they've got their Spanish partners. And you get a nice kind of melange. And I'm just sitting there shouting at people, all right, question number 3. It's quite good.
But you have Spanish people come into the shop.
Oh yeah, loads. I mean, from a shop point of view, loads of Spanish people because we sell wine. We get them on the tastings. The daily tastings, which is like our bread and butter one, which we run every day. I do admit I push towards and hope it's mostly going to be tourists, because that was the idea. You're in Madrid for a couple of days, and you're going to Barcelona, then we're going to go to Seville, and you want to know a little bit about what the hell is this world of Spanish wine. As in, it's nice if you get a Spanish person. I always feel a bit bad if it's like one Spanish couple and then like 12 tourists. I'm like, oh, this is going to be fun linguistically for me. But I always say, like, for the Spanish people, I always think, like, if you've got, they often want to do things with groups of friends. It's really fun. We can design, like, because they'll often know a little bit more than the average foreign person coming in, and we can design things for them. But the Thursday tastings, our theme ones we do every Thursday, which I envisioned for the expat community originally. We get loads of Spanish come to that. And a lot of them actually like to come and practice their English as well. It's quite cool. And the vermouth tasting, which we only do a couple of days a week, has become the most popular with the Spanish, because vermouth is really cool now. And they don't know much about it, So yeah.
Yeah. I wish I liked vermouth.
You must come to our vermouth tasting.
No, I drank too much of it when I was a teenager. And
it's like why I can't touch Sambuca.
Yeah. Do you ever get people come in who've heard the podcast?
Quite a lot, actually. To the point where I always feel a bit like, I must ham it up a bit and be more drunk and cheeky. But yeah, we get a lot of Americans when they visit. I love American tourists because when they plan, they don't come over. Like, a Brit will come for a weekend away and they're just going to drink and eat and be like, oh, it's sunshine, and go home. Whereas Americans are spending a lot of money trying to get out of a faraway country and get all the way over here. So they're like, okay, we got this, we're going to do that, we're going to do that. Like, they don't miss a trick, which is great, and they're very interested. Now, a lot of them pre-research and listen to podcasts and all this kind of things. A lot of people know of us through another podcast we did years ago, Paul Burge.
Oh yeah.
So he did. I don't know if he still does his podcast, but he was very active for a while, and we were on his podcast like 5 years ago. And so people were like, "Yeah, I heard you're on a podcast with an English guy," and I was like, "Paul." So they're researching things, and so I often get people coming in being like, "Hey, yeah, well, we thought we'd stop by. We listened to your podcast," and I'm like, "Oh, this is embarrassing. Must be funny. Must be charismatic. Hello, But yeah, sometimes.
Well, part of the reason why your podcast is so good is you have a really nice banter with Rocky.
Yeah, he's got quite a British sense of humor, which is good. I'm not saying the Spanish aren't funny. No, I would say they're not quite a similar kind of vibe. But he always loved British and American series and TV, so he's got quite good, back and forth, and he likes to push the boundaries and be cheeky, which people quite like.
Another question I wanted to ask, but I guess that kind of segues nicely in, because you started a business together, of course. If someone's thinking about starting a business here in Madrid, do you have any advice to give?
Don't. Just breathe and plan. I mean, Spain is quite easy to set up businesses here. We were surprised how few impediments there were. I wouldn't say there's necessarily a lot of help, in the sense of, you can imagine idyllic, utopic countries like Finland being like, oh yes, we'll give you all this. It's still quite, you can get, if you tick the boxes, bureaucracy side of things, tick boxes, do this, do that. It's quite easy to set up, which is why a lot of times you'll find lots of pop-up bars, little things appearing. Now, whether they last or not is up to them. So bureaucratically, it's not a headache. I mean, it's not a headache if you get it all ordered.
You have to have a good accountant.
You have to have a good accountant, and that's very useful. They've got a Spanish business partner, because the language, it's like I'm reading Chinese sometimes. But apart from that side of things, which is the boring bit, which is just to make sure you know what you're doing, I guess it's just, as any business in any city, you need to find a niche or a nook where it makes sense. So, I mean, Spain's famous for their food, and we're next to La Latina, for example, we've got millions of tapas bars in, and I sometimes think, like, it's a tough gig if you want to open a tapas bar. Like, what is your niche? Why are people going to go to that one? So I think when we opened this, the reason we had confidence when we wanted to open our one is because I was like, as much as I love the Spanish, I'm not trying to tap into just the local people buying their wines.
Yeah.
So we were like, we're going to push outwards. A lot of our content is in English. The pub quiz is only in English. I mean, Spanish people come. So we were just like having that little hook that why would people go to your place? But then obviously, what does a business mean? There's a wonderful little bookshop near here called The Secret Kingdoms, which is a little English language bookshop. And it's been open 3 years or something. And every time I go there, I'm always like really happy. It's like full of people buying books, Spanish and English, because that's the niche. The niche was for him. Apart from what little place called Desperate Literature, there was no English language bookshops, which you could argue on one hand, why should there be? We're in Spain. On the other hand, you're like, we're in a flipping capital city. How isn't there any?
Yeah.
So if you have like a little, if you believe in your concept, money aside and how can we make it work aside, I think it's what's that horrible term? The USP, the unique selling point. I think that's
do some market research.
Do some market research. Yeah, a lot of market, and choose your location for what you want to do as well.
Yeah. Is there anything wine related that I should have asked? Oh, yeah, I didn't ask about Spanish wine trends. You were excited.
Yeah, I mean, Spain, we like this. This is an exciting country. Like France, I don't want to be harsh. It's kind of boring. It works. They don't change very lot. And it's not often worth taking many risks if you're a winemaker because it's like, it works. Like if you're in Bordeaux and you live in Bordeaux, you're going to make a Bordeaux because why wouldn't you? That's going to sell. Now, I'm sure there will be trends and there might be some angry bloke called Antoine emailing you being like, tell that English guy that this has happening. But I can only speak for Spain. We often say it's like an old world country pretending to be new world. So it's very exciting from a labeling point of view, from what they can do. So the current things, I don't know if trend is the right word, but areas where I'm finding a lot of, for me as a qualified alcoholic, really interesting. Galicia in general is a great seal of approval as quality concerns, but they're pushing, as well as Alicante on the other side of the country, Mediterranean, both recuperating old autochthonous varieties, so grapes that are kind of fallen out of fashion. Alicante had that thing of being paid to get rid of grapes and plant Chardonnay and stuff. And they're finding all these old varieties that they used to have century ago, and they're making wines with these grapes. So it's really exciting to see just all these cool grapes coming out and these amazing projects. And they're often small projects, which is always fun. And weirdly, even though we were talking about it earlier being often like a boring option, I fell back in love with Rioja almost a year ago today. I did this thing called the Rioja Educator course. I wanted to get another pin for my collection and another certificate. But essentially, it's a 4-day course. There's tests, there's an exam. You have to write an essay, blah, 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 blah. And I kind of wanted to do it just to not get a free holiday, but, take me around Rioja. I was chosen I was the only one from Madrid, all this kind of stuff. And I was just like, yeah, sounds fun. I'll get a pin. But genuinely fell back in love with Rioja. So Rioja in the shops, if you're in Madrid and you want to go to, for example, Madrid and Darracott, if you want to go to a nice independent wine shop, the depth and variety of things happening in Rioja is mind-blowing and it's really fun. Lots of small producers focusing on other grapes. There's way more than Tempranillo there, different ways. Or you mentioned like the clay vats and amphora doing things with different aging. So I don't know if it's a trend necessarily in the bars, but in the wine trend, we're seeing a lot of new producers in other regions as well, especially in that Rioja, really doing interesting things. So the region which you thought was boring, and it's actually the most interesting. And then I would say Galicia and Alicante are my hot ones for the moment.
Okay, great. That sort of goes back to the Madrid varieties, the Albio and Alvar. Because
I feel a bit bad. Yeah, also Madrid's really good. I mean, Madrid is hampered by its constraints. It's very much Garnacha and Albio here, Tempranillo and stuff, and Malvar there. So there's not a lot of flexibility with grapes, but lots of really cool new projects happening with like Garnachas and Albios. I would say that's the most cool and interesting out in the West. The key is I want to see more of that in the bars in Madrid. I think Madrid's bars need to sort of pull their socks up and stock the local stuff. It makes no sense that they don't.
And actually, I hope it's okay to plug something that I wrote. But
I feel you're allowed.
I wrote in consultation with Luke about Madrid wines. It's unfortunately behind a paywall on the Financial Times, but it's about Madrid wines, and it's got what wines are good and where you can go and visit wineries. So and some bars as well. So a variety of different places that do Madrid wines.
That's good.
So, and speaking of that, I was going to ask you about your favorite place off the beaten track. Maybe you could name a bar before that.
So there's a couple of, So a couple, I'll give you like three, my top three favorite little places, my little happy
Mhm.
places where I drink. Sounds very healthy. I mean, there's one which is not really off the beaten track anymore to the point where I have to get there on opening, otherwise I can't get in, but it's called La Venencia, which is a famous historic sherry bar from the 1920s. Um, they say Hemingway used to write there, we used to drink there in the Civil War era. People, the Republicans would go there, blah, 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 blah. So that's like my happy place. That's where I discovered sherry, which I think is the best wine in the world. However, it's not a hidden secret anymore. It's hidden visually, but that's one of my places. There are a couple of wine bars near me. There's one called Bar Tempranillo.
Mhm.
Not a very imaginative name. Amazing bar. That was the first bar I went to when we finally could leave our homes after the pandemic.
Mhm.
There's a photo of me, a big fat glass of Madrid wine. It was Lithinia Madrid wine, looking very bedraggled. I hadn't gone to the hairdresser. And there's another one called Casa Gerardo, which says Almacén de Vinos, which is quite fun because people get confused where it is. And that's a really old, 100-year-old place with the big wine vats inside. So they're my like little three nooks in my neck of the woods where I would drink, basically.
And what's your favourite place off the beaten track in Madrid?
I was thinking about this because the problem is, that's why I think I was chatting with you beforehand. I was like, I basically just got a list of bars in my head, but I do like parks. It's one of my sort of places where I feel quite calm. So in Madrid, I don't know how off the beaten track it is. There's a couple of really nice parks. One I was in yesterday, which is called Quinta de Molino, which is where they have all the cherry trees. When they blossom, they look very lovely.
Ah, yes, it's the perfect time for that.
Yes, it's just starting now. I think I was a touch early, but wonderful.
Hopefully this will go out in time.
If not, see you guys next spring. And there's also one called El Capricho, which is a beautiful park. It's like a park museum, gorgeous thing. And then near me, there's just a church. I also, ironically, for a non-religious person, my favorite buildings are churches. It's the San Francisco El Grande, which is a big cupola domed kind of pastel yellow building, but it's got incredible painted ceiling inside. And that's kind of hiding in plain sight. But yeah, those little things.
Yeah, that one's fantastic. And your favorite Spanish word?
Yeah, I remember when you mentioned that at some point, and I was like, that's an impossible task. I was like, vino? No. I think my favorite word is it's a Galician word, which you'll know as well, morriña. And this is, so the Gallegos and the Galicians, everyone feels homesickness, and especially us as expats, we all, we love living here, but there'll be times you thought, I miss home, I miss this. And morriña is a very specific, it's basically homesickness for a Galician missing Galicia. When they used to travel also across the New World, they would miss their beautiful Ireland, Norway, baby area, morriña, they would feel morriña. And it seems to be in Spain, the rest of Spain doesn't really seem to have a word for homesickness for their own bits. And I like to have that specificity. And I love Galicia so much, I always like to joke that I feel morriña for Galicia as well. This is a fun one to say, morriña. Yeah, morriña.
Funnily enough, I don't know that one, but I haven't been to Galicia that much.
If you go, you'll start feeling morriña.
All right, well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast, and we can wrap it up there.
Yes.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. I know I had a great time learning more about wine from Luke. And if you have any comments about the topic, do get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. If you're a fan of the show in general, please like and subscribe. And see you in a couple of weeks' time.